everyone, and welcome back to episode 17 of the Crag Chat Climbing Podcast. Today, I have Dr. Alyssa O'Krent with me today. She reached out to me. She has a physical therapy practice in Austin, Texas. She is a climber and a runner. I also am a climber and a runner, so I thought it was kind of a match made in heaven to have her on the podcast. I would love if you would just tell me a little bit about how you got started climbing and running, and like which one came first and how they kind of play a role in your life.
So running definitely came first for me. I started running when I was in high school. My aunt invited me along one of her races. We ran it together. We had like the best time. For me, running has always been a really easy access sport. I'm kind of almost like addicted to exercise in a way. My mind is kind of dependent on it. So I've kind of battled depression and I have unmedicated ADD as an adult. You know, my proclivity towards exercise is probably a little bit due to that. And for me, running has always been a way to like really easily tap into movement and exercise and exertion and just kind of like regulating stuff in my mind. And then as far as climbing goes, climbing is a little bit more recent. I actually dated a climber about 6 years ago, and that was my first exposure to rock climbing. So I got the shoes back then and kind of learned a few things and then took a really long break from it. I came back to it relatively recently when I actually opened my practice. So my practice I opened in October. When opening this practice, I was looking at places in Austin. I was actually living in Colorado at the time. I wanted to come back to my hometown, which is Austin, and I wanted to open my own practice and do PT differently. So when looking at where to do that, I have a friend who was actually kind of running some really cool programs here at Crux. I reached out to him, gave him the idea. He thought it was a really excellent idea. And then I just dove into climbing. You know, there's a need for climbing medicine providers in the nation as a whole, and wanted to become one of those providers, wanted to tap into this really niche sport. And so it's been really cool to kind of learn the sport almost as a beginner in a way, and then learning about the training as a beginner to becoming intermediate and then advancing through the sport and having the mindset and the framework around like injury prevention has been wildly helpful in actually helping me get better as a climber. Yeah, that's kind of my history and why I kind of like the two sports. Well, I really like the episode where you guys were like running to the different climbing gyms. I'm like, that's an ideal day.
It was so ideal. It was so ideal. It was such a fun day. If anyone's unfamiliar, she's referencing, we did an episode on Court Climbs where my friend Tara and I ran to every gym in Pittsburgh, like on foot. And it was a really fun day. I'm glad you enjoyed that episode though. I have a question about labels as far as like being a climber or being a runner. So something that I really struggled with is I actually started running before I started climbing too. I started running in about 2014, I believe, and I didn't start climbing until 2018. So one thing that was really difficult for me when I was starting to climb more and starting to kind of like tip the scale more towards spending my time climbing rather than running was like that label of not feeling like as much of a runner and more of a climber, but like being in that weird space. Has that been an issue for you at all? How have you felt around that?
Yeah, you know, when I first started and was kind of getting more and more exposure at the gym, that was people's default question for me was, are you a climber? I just kind of felt uncomfortable to say yes and to own that label. You know, I grappled with it. I always have really identified as a runner, I think, because I really enjoy running, right? And with climbing, it was kind of a love-hate relationship at first when I started, because it is a pretty technical sport and there's a curve to it. There's not only a learning curve, but there's also you're limited, you know, as even as strong as an athlete as I felt I was, I still couldn't excel because you have to gradually build that strength. So yeah, I didn't initially like outright love it. I knew it was like type 2 fun. You know what that is, where it's like,
Yep.
You don't initially like have the best time, and then afterwards you're like, that was so fun. I want to do it again. And you just keep doing it again. So I think over time it became more comfortable for me to own that label and to say, yeah, I'm a climber. I'm somebody who brings myself and enjoys climbing. I do this on a consistent basis. I don't think that there needs to be any qualifiers for if you're a runner versus, soccer player. If you enjoy that sport and you identify around even maybe like the culture of that sport and it's a part of who you are, then I think you can own whatever label you choose.
No, I really relate to everything that you said. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that feels that way. I think that we all struggle with like people are so multifaceted and like others perceive us generally as like a handful of things, right? Like others can't perceive us as everything that we are. Yeah, it's an interesting question. You climbed like 6 years ago and then you restarted like recently. How has that been? Do you feel like you kind of got right back into the swing of things, or do you feel like tell me about that experience a little bit?
Well, when I first started, I was just in the process of opening the practice, which was pretty consuming. It was pretty involved. I was pretty involved in a lot of things. And I was maybe climbing once a week. And a friend of mine told me, as soon as you start climbing twice a week, you'll start getting better. So I made a point to fit that into my schedule and to, even though it felt unnatural, to pull away from the other things that I was doing, like, I'm going to sacrifice this run day or this weight training day to climb again. I did start getting better with 2 days a week cadence. Now I'm enjoying it so much that it's just, now I'm like, I want to do 2 days back to back, or I want to do 3 days, or I want to do 4 days. And now I'm having like pull myself back from a little bit, which feels really good actually. Yeah, I think that just studying the sport and really studying kind of movement patterns, studying the different techniques on the wall, it's helped my climbing so much. And sometimes I'm able to teach things to climbers who are more advanced, who are climbing harder things than me, because I understand it from a different vantage point, right? Why things should move the way that they should when you're on a wall is super helpful. So I feel really grateful for that. But I'm sure you feel this too, is that it's, there's cheerleaders around you all the time, even when you don't know these people, who are just amping you up and encouraging you. It's unlike a lot of sports in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare if you're on a tennis court that next to you on the court are like, you got this, come on,
Yeah.
that was a great serve. With climbing, it's so fun to like advance among your peers and to foster their growth and they're fostering yours. Having a mentor here who he's an interesting guy. I mean, I think he deserves like his own interview. I mean, he's fascinating. His name is David McGovern. So he's been climbing and guiding for over 50 years.
Wow.
He kind of took me on as his little duckling. Getting to climb with him is incredibly helpful because he's also very philosophical. Yeah, just those type of relationships that you can build in a rock climbing gym are also very unique to the sport too, right? Where you have that time to chat, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of built into the sport. I'm really loving it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad that you found someone that is a good mentor for you. That's so important in climbing. I know that I went to the climbing gym, never having climbed before, and I found someone that even if they couldn't always go at the same time as me, they were always willing to like chat about climbing, like over text or on the phone, like, hey, how'd this problem go or that problem go or whatever. And so yeah, it's just fun to share your excitement about something that you're passionate about. That's I
Sure.
mean, look, we're on a climbing related podcast. We're sharing it with everyone. So tell me a little bit more about, you said your physical therapy practice is located inside the gym. And you also said that was a lot to get started. Maybe if there are other physical therapists thinking about this, they're like, oh, that's an awesome idea to actually have it in the gym. Do you think that it's brought you more clients, or like maybe the types of clients you're looking to work with rather than having it at a different location?
Yeah, no doubt. And that was kind of the reason why I wanted to be located inside of a climbing gym. Knowing that the community was a community that I really jived with. If you took like a jock, a hippie, and a nerd, and you put them into a bar and you had them create a sport, they would come up with climbing. And being inside of a rock climbing space does give me access also to the walls to work with during treatment, right? Which is also pretty epic. Otherwise I would have to kind of build my own wall. I also just didn't want kind of a ton of overhead, right? So I just sublet. I lease space here. I would highly recommend if there's like a chiropractor, massage therapist, a physical therapist looking to kind of start their own practice, first figuring out what do you want to treat, and then finding a place that wants you in their space.
Finding someone that understands climbing and then like climbing related injuries is such a niche thing. It feels like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
It definitely is. And PTs in general, we like shy away from the hand. We refer out for the most part to OTs, occupational therapists. But when you're a climbing specific PT, you have to love the hand. You have to see the hand all the time. So yeah, so getting really cozy and comfortable with the hand, wanting to treat the hand is something that's definitely there. And then the injuries are super specific usually. Sometimes these injuries don't really occur in any other sport unless you're horrifically unlucky. Also getting really familiar with the types of injuries, what leads to those injuries.
So you'll understand this, but put yourself in the mind of someone that doesn't climb and try to explain this without using any lingo. So all that happened was my husband and I were about to leave the climbing gym, and I said, I'm going to hop on this V0 real quick. I hop on the V0, I get down to the last hold, and I jump off, not like anything high. It was about a foot. And I don't know what happened, but I landed wrong, and my knee just like, something went wrong in my knee. I was trying to explain this to the doctor and to the physical therapist that I was then working with, which they were great. They were trying their best, but they're like, wait, so what's the V0? How high did you fall from? What did you land on? Why weren't you using a rope? Just all these things, like trying to, and I was like, never mind. Like, so I started just explaining it to non-climbers as, yeah, I jumped down from this thing weird and my knee hurt. Like, and then people were like, oh, okay, but then they still ask the questions. I'm like, never mind.
There's so much lingo that goes into climbing. Like there's a whole vernacular of terms and everything. So it's super helpful to be able to, it's like speaking Spanish, you know?
Yeah.
If I have a Spanish speaking patient, they're going to feel so comfortable with the fact that they can speak Spanish together. Same with
you
climbing.
Speak Spanish?
Like, otherwise you have to. I speak Spanish, yes.
Oh, sweet. Okay, yeah. Cool. So not only does she climb, if you're a Spanish speaking climber, this is your gal. I would love to hear a specific example of someone that you've helped recently over the last year. Like they went from point A to point B, point A being they weren't in a good space, they weren't being able to climb in the way that they wanted to, and then point B being like they're back and they're climbing and they're super stoked about life.
Fortunately, that's a majority of the people that I've seen. They want to get back on the wall and then they get back on the wall and they're feeling stronger. But yeah, I think it's cool here because also my age range is pretty broad, right? So I have like teenage competitive climbers, and then I have climbers who are in their 60s, right? When you're young, you're usually pretty injury free and pretty disconnected from your body, meaning I don't know what pain is versus I don't know what this other sensation is, you know. And then as climbers oftentimes neglect things for a really long time. And so yeah, I think that's just the most interesting part is when I do help people, then their ability to then feel stronger on the wall. I have a climber who was an aerialist and a climber, or a guy who was a jiu-jitsu fighter and a climber. A lot of these patients that I see, climbing is maybe their secondary sport, or they have another secondary sport. The carryover in the two sports that they have, where they're like, well, this is also kind of really helping me in my jiu-jitsu. Like if it's a hamstring sprain, finding that, well, they can do lock-offs a lot easier in jiu-jitsu, which is a different term for that sport. And then when they're climbing too, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that I could have been recruiting this for this long and getting my hips closer in this way. I feel so much stronger on the wall just by focusing on treating this area, right? It brought a couple of patients to mind of how it kind of transformed them as athletes as a whole.
The hamstring injury, that was one example. What's an example of like another injury that someone came in, like a climbing related injury?
Do you see a lot of shoulders? I see a lot of elbow pain. I also see a few fingers, not as many as I anticipated, but for the most part, by and large, it's a lot of shoulders that I see.
Yeah. That's interesting that you say that, because my friend, she's really into climbing. She actually has been having shoulder pain like on the outside of her shoulder. She said that it's like an overuse injury. So it doesn't happen necessarily until she's been climbing a lot or climbing really hard. One of her friends told her to do basically take 5-pound weights in each hand and do like eyes, Y's, and T's, so out to the side, out in front, out kind of at a diagonal. Would that be something that, like, is that good advice, or is that just like a random friend being like, like, that'll be helpful?
So it definitely depends. I'd have to know a little bit more about the injury. Typically, if you're doing eyes, Y's, and T's in a traditional sense, you're doing them more against gravity. So you're actually in a position where you're pulling back this way instead of up this way. So this is more just working on your deltoids, versus when you're doing a traditional eyes, Y's, and T's, you're working on different muscle groups in the back. So if it is a deltoid sprain that she has, then eyes, deltoid raises like she was doing could definitely help it. But if it's a more like in rotator cuff territory land, then you'd probably want to do the other variation where you're getting an incline against gravity and using more mid trap, lower trap, rhomboids. That's such a good example of fielding questions as a climbing medicine provider. Is first we want to narrow down, not diagnose, I don't love the word diagnose, but really figure out exactly what's going on with what's happening before we start shooting stuff at it.
I'm the type of person that the reason that I wouldn't potentially go see any sort of PT or do anything is twofold. One, it's hassle. It'll be fine, right? It'll work itself out. Or two, everything that I've looked up online essentially says that what I'm going to be told is to rest. Like in the case of my finger injury, I was basically told that if I were to go see a PT, they're going to tell me to like take time off. And I don't want to. In the case of when it was really bad, I was like, well, if I am going to have to go see a PT, drive there, and just be told to rest, and then, hey, that's $500. Like, I can just do that right now on my own, right? I was pulling really hard on a Gaston, as a slopey type of a Gaston. My finger just, it didn't really pop, but it kind of definitely, something went wrong in there. And what I decided to do is just take a month off. Like, I was like, I'm just going to take an entire month off. And when I came back, it definitely was quote unquote better, but it's still just been kind of tweaky on and off since then. And so my fix to that was tape. You can fix anything with tape, right? Because actually I was like, I don't really know what to do with this. And one of my friends just goes, oh, I climb with a tweaked finger all the time. I just tape it. Here, I'll show you how. And so I guess I share this story to illustrate the point that, like, I think a lot of us are doing things like this, like either just masking over the problem with tape or like saying that that's not really that bad. I would love for you to like provide me with some reasons why what I did maybe isn't the best, and then like what would you do for something like a finger if I told you that story coming in?
For sure. Yeah. Just going back to kind of the two reasons why you wouldn't see PT, the two most common reasons for climbers in general is climbers are really used to having things that are kind of tweaky. They come up and then they just resolve and then they get back at it. We're no strangers to pain. Some moves are actually kind of painful. So our pain tolerance can kind of be misleading. Pretty common to say, well, I don't know if I should wait or if I should seek help or not. And it's kind of person specific, but I would say in general, if an injury isn't getting better and better, if something is persisting for longer than a week and isn't getting better and better, then that's a good time to go and seek help. Knowing too that the sooner that you seek intervention, the faster things will get better is also kind of a good thing to keep in mind. Like, you don't want to let it go for too long because it will take longer to get better. And then the reason too is being told to rest. A good climbing medicine provider will likely tell you not to rest. There are only a few incidences where rest is actually necessary, and one is with kind of a pulley sprain, but only to a certain degree of a pulley sprain. So if you have a pretty mild pulley sprain, you still won't really have to rest. You'll have to follow a protocol, but that protocol is going to include loading. If the pulley sprain is kind of a moderate to severe, then you will have to rest, but there's also a lot of other things that you can do to help that speed up. And it's super important to get those addressed and diagnosed, because if you miss that window and you're loading an already moderately sprained pulley, you're really going to do a lot of damage to it. I would say that a good provider is going to tell you, no, do not rest, and will know exactly how to get you on the wall and give you a clear idea of what to do on the wall to avoid resting. And it's interesting when your friend told you to tape your finger with taping, you know, it gives us kind of a boost in confidence to like make harder moves happen. And sometimes we shouldn't overload our tissue if it's already damaged, and taping can allow us to do that. So I'm not a huge fan of taping. There are only kind of specific instances where taping is really helpful. One of those being a pulley sprain, right? And a mild pulley sprain at that. What taping can do is it can give you kind of this sense of proprioception, which is the body's ability to speak to the brain and to tell something that it's there. And sometimes even just allowing your brain to kind of know, like, okay, this injury is here, I need to be a little bit more mindful, can be beneficial to a degree. But is taping actually doing anything to physiologically change the integrity or the strength of that tissue? Very little. Very, very little. You know, of all the taping techniques, the H tape is probably the best form of taping technique. You know, from there's a little bit more specifics as far as like, if you have pain on the outer part of the finger, then that requires a different type of tape. Yeah, I mean, you're not terribly wrong to say, well, I'm going to tape it and see how that goes. But at the same time, like, knowing which types of things to do to progressively load and get the tensile force of that tissue stronger without the external assistance of it is more important.
I kind of had to laugh when you said you should seek help within a week. And that, I'm sure that's correct. This is, like I said, this initial like injury happened about a year ago, and then it's kind of just like it's gotten better, but it's still like kind of there. So I guess like now, what steps should I do to help it progress, like to help it fix it?
Yeah, so are you having any pain? Do you do any things on hangboards at all?
I don't really hangboard. The times when I feel pain in it is if I'm like on small crimps, or if I'm pulling really hard. But I can climb like most juggy things or slopers or anything. It's just mostly small crimps that tend to give it a lot of hassle. And then also if I've just climbed a lot, then it'll start to get kind of naggy.
Yeah, so I think that if it's really just hurting with specific holds, then what you'll want to do is actually work on the specific holds in a little bit more of an unloaded manner. And sometimes a hangboard can be a good place to safely do that, because you can do kind of no hangs where your feet are still on the ground, and you can kind of just recruit down and then work on, you know, different lengths of holds. So knowing the exact type of hold to work on is helpful, which you've already kind of narrowed down. Making sure that it's adequately warmed up. It does sound like it could be something related to your pulley. So making sure that you have adequate through everything to the fingertips is super important. When we think about finger injuries, we oftentimes will think about just fingers, but really this whole complex is important. So there are muscle groups that are just inside of your hands, the the hand intrinsic muscle groups, and then your extrinsic muscle groups, which actually come from your finger into kind of your elbow area. You want to try to address if there's any weakness inside of the hand as well as outside of the hand. So I would say that it's also important to start training the finger flexors, finger extensors, wrist extensors, and knowing some exercises to do for that. I have an Instagram handle and I post a lot of climbing videos, climbing rehab videos, and there's definitely a video that I can send your way for specific things to do for those muscle groups that's going to just help the finger and the integrity of the finger, because really it's not only the finger that's pulling on those holds, it's also to a degree your extensors and your wrist flexors as well. And then we would want to look at, it sounds really unrelated, but we'd want to even look and we'd want to see how your hip mobility is. Then we want to look at the shoulder complex. We want to see what mobility does your shoulder have, but also how is your shoulder recruiting when you're on the wall? How are you sticking to the wall? You might say, well, I know for sure my like right hip is super stiff, or both of my hips are super stiff. Then that's probably carrying over into the way that you're pulling and recruiting on the wall. And that might be a reason why that finger injury occurred.
That's crazy, simply because I was telling you that I had that knee injury previously, and one of the things that happened with that I could climb perfectly fine. It was when I was running that was the issue. So one of the things that was done is I got a gait analysis, and it was crazy to me because I've done so many. I work in the running industry. I've done so many gait analysis maybe on yeah, I've done so many of these on other people, but I've never had one done on myself. And my right hip, yeah, every time it dips so much lower than my left hip when I'm running. I mean, you're probably spot on, exactly right, but I would have never put two and two together that would have been why I injured my finger. So that's really intriguing to me. Or one of the factors anyways, yeah.
One of the factors. Yeah, it's usually a multifactorial thing. Yeah, and it does sound like your left outer glute might be weak if your right hip is dropping lower while you're running. And maybe your adductors, the inner portion, the inner muscles on your right side are maybe overdeveloped as well. So yeah, it's really fun to get into. I mean, it's super fun to, I feel lucky that I get to be a problem solver as well as an educator, because this is not monotonous at all, right?
Yeah.
There's no monotony to this job. It's the best. Do you have a good warm-up practice?
I don't. No. And it's not it's not because I don't know any, it's because I haven't prioritized it. The more I'm in the climbing world, I've been climbing for almost 6 years now. My general go-to for a warm-up is I climb a few V0s and V1s, and then I climb whatever I want. It's kind of interesting too, because I came from a ropes gym, and so I feel like you can warm up a lot better if you're like on ropes, because you're just on the wall longer climbing these easy things, whereas climbing V0, V1 boulder problems, like, it's not very long. The other thing that I will say, I had climbers that were climbing, I think maybe V5, V6, like those were the climbers that I looked up to when I first started climbing, right? I was like, wow, you can climb these grades, that's amazing. And they would say, yeah, I just climb a bunch of easy climbs to warm up, and then I go hop on my project. And to me, I was like, well, I can't really warm up if I like these easy climbs are what I'm climbing. Like, I think as a beginner climber, it's like maybe really, really important. If anything, it's one of those things, maybe you can't teach an old dog new tricks, like you can, but it's harder. It's like, because I was a beginner climber and I didn't put a warm-up into my routine right away, like now it's really difficult for me to convince myself that I should, but I know that I should. So yes, definitely something that's on the mind.
For sure. Yeah. So as far as fingers go, I mean, 100 touches is, I'm lucky that I get to ride on the shoulders of these other giants who've done research on these things. So, but basically 100 touches of a progressively loading is going to get your fingers ready. Basically, most importantly, your pulleys ready to climb harder things. And what we don't want to do is gas ourselves out on these super easy warm-up routes, right? We don't want to no, we want to save gas in the tank for harder stuff. So at the gym, even on top rope and on boulder problems, going up and down and using a spray wall that has easy holds to just move laterally is a great way to get that in quickly, where you're not having to hunt around and search for all the V0s and V1s throughout the gym. That's a big part of warming up your fingers. The other part of a warm up, in my opinion, is making sure that you get some dynamic movement through the whole body. And I have a couple of videos again of really fun just circuits that look kind of like a hybrid between yoga and jiu-jitsu almost, where you're getting into movements that the body makes on the wall. And if you're doing those movements unloaded on the mat, then when you're doing them on the wall, the likelihood of those muscles straining and causing injury is a lot lower. So shouldn't take more than maybe 5-10 minutes to do that first portion. And then the other piece is those routes. So for bouldering, probably about 8, where you're going up and down, really easy stuff, progressively getting a little bit harder. And then once you feel like you've got a pretty good fair pump, rest, shake it off, and then you're good to go.
So a lot of people talk about the importance of a warm-up. Do you think that it's important to do any sort of cool down?
Yeah, I think it's a nice idea to take advantage of the fact that your muscles are warm and to work on your flexibility at that time. Mobility is kind of moving through actively through your range of motion. And when you're doing your warm-up, you're working a lot on mobility. And then at the end, it's a good idea to kind of optimize that time to work on flexibility, where you're just doing some passive, static, long hold stretching, and also taking time to get your central nervous system to kind of gear back down to then go throughout your day, right? It's almost like if you took a cat and shook it up in a box and then you just threw it out into the street, right? The cat's going to be wild. We want to give our central nervous system also some time to wind down before we go into sending an email and replying to your boss, right? Our fight or flight mode gets driven way up when we climb. And so we do want to kind of regulate a little bit, and taking time to cool down is important. I would say a warm-up is a necessity.
Gotcha.
I'll cool down as a nice option.
Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but we go in that evening period, right? And then we're just trying to get home and do whatever we need to do next for the next day. So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about specifically about your PT practice or climbing related injuries or just anything in that realm of space before we move on to a little bit more about climbing in Texas? Because that's another thing that I'm interested in.
Yeah, in general. So the practice that I have, it's located inside of Crag Climbing Center. We have 2 locations in town, so we're building a third. It's funny because if you were to do where you ran to the climbing gyms in Austin, it would be damn near impossible. You'd have to go onto highways and oh my god, would not want that for you.
Future video idea. we'll try to make it work somehow.
If you get into ultra running, or we could do it a relay, I think would be fun.
Or maybe there could be are there rivers that go through? We could do kayaking.
There's definitely a river.
I'm not a kayaker, but I could try.
I love this idea, an adventure race through Austin. Maybe it involves scooters. I don't know. It could get dangerous.
Those electric scooters. You'll appreciate this. When I did my first marathon, I had a friend show up and surprise me, and she didn't know that my husband was gonna ride his bike. And she's like, "Oh, I was planning on just walking with you." And he's like, "Well, you should rent one of those electric scooters." And so at mile 9, I'm running, and all of a sudden I hear, "Hey, Courtney." And there's my husband on his bike, and then my friend Amber on this electric scooter. They're it was so funny. And then I'll never forget the very last mile. I'm I'm dying, like I'm at the very end of the marathon. I just see it was so busy. The spectators section was like so crowded. And I just see Amber like fighting through the crowd with this electric scooter. They're heavy too, because she couldn't ride it.
So heavy.
She still to this day has a scar on her ankle because you know how when you're a kid and the scooter comes around and like swings and hits you in the ankle? That's what happened to her, but except with an electric scooter. So she really came through for me on that marathon with the support. So Amber, you're probably not listening, but you are. Yeah, it was great. So
story, and what a good friend.
We gotta include a scooter in this for sure.
Well, scooter. There will be electric scooters. There will also be a helmet if I have any say in it.
I'm down.
Yeah, so I'm located inside of Crag Climbing Center, our South Congress location, so kind of in central Austin. And we have a North Austin location and a Pflugerville location as well, but I'm here at the South location. I also treat virtually, and so a lot of injuries I can assess and diagnose and treat virtually, which makes it a little bit more accessible. And yeah, I work one-on-one with patients for a full hour, which is very unique to, healthcare providers in general, but especially to physical therapists. And so I left my other job where I was kind of treating 15 to 20 patients in a day. And most PTs are now seeing that many patients in a day. And so it's a very different type of experience as a patient. Because I spend more time with each patient, I'm able to get most patients better within 5 sessions. So I offer kind of a 5-visit package for that reason. A-OK Physical Therapy. It's A-OK. My name is Alyssa O'Krent.
That's clever. Tell me a little bit more about like climbing in Austin specifically. Do you primarily climb just indoors? Do you climb outdoors? Like, tell me a little bit about the climbing community there and your experience with it.
I personally mostly climb indoors for time's sake. I would like to get to a place where I have more time to go outside, but it does take a good chunk of time. In Texas, here in Austin, we are right now in the middle of summer, and our highs are like 109, and but we still have nice mornings here, so people still get out and they climb in the mornings. If you do want to go, it's pretty easy to find people to go with. In Central Texas, we have a lot of like soft limestone, so it's not really known for trad climbing. The closest place for that would be like Enchanted Rock, which is an hour and a half from Austin. It's beautiful, but it's also like it's definitely not world class. But here in town we have the Greenbelt, and it goes right through the middle of town. It's beautiful, and there are quite a few routes to go and sport climb down there, as well as a couple great bouldering projects. Because it goes through town and it's a little bit busier, and it has been for many years. It's pretty polished. The better option is to go about 45 minutes from town. We have a place called Reimer's Ranch. Also, a body of water runs through it. Sometimes it's flowing. It's called the Pernalis River. So sometimes it's swimmable, but it's also super scenic. There's a lot of really great routes. It's pretty friendly for most climbers from intermediate to advanced. And yeah, so there is a scene here. It's a little bit, a little limited, and I'm sure if you go outdoors all the time, it might get kind of old, but I think it's a pretty good scene.
So hearing these areas, I'm really, really thankful to have started outdoor climbing in Ohio, because Ohio's a relatively flat state. There's not exactly world-class climbing there, but it made me really thankful to be able to outdoor climb at all. Like, I think there's a sense of maybe a little bit of entitlement that like, oh, we should be able to climb these like amazing things outdoors, and it's really just a privilege to be able to get out there at all. And I know for me, the climbing is fun, but also just exploring nature and the space that you're in is a really great part of it too.
Yeah, I like how you said like, yeah, we're really like not entitled to any of it, and we should definitely be grateful for the thing that we have. Yeah, and starting out with the bar so like low.
Yeah.
How I grew up like going to like the Gulf of Mexico as a beach, and then I was like, I never thought I was a beach person until I went to like Pensacola and like saw a nice beach, and I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, yeah this is cool. Like, Yeah, now I really get it.
To me, it's like also just about the love of it. I think that people that might not want to go outside at like quote unquote not as good crags, they might say that the climbing's not as good, but like as someone just starting off going outside, like you don't need good climbing. You're gonna go out, climb like 5 routes and be completely toasted. So like you don't need the tallest things, you don't need the hardest things. Like if the approach is short, that's nice. That is one thing that Ohio had going for it is the approaches. I think the longest approach was like a mile. That was awesome. I actually didn't understand what a long approach was till I started climbing in the new. My best friend calls it a hiking hellscape. She'll always text me, "Are you in the hiking hellscape?"
How long are the approaches out there?
I'd say between like a mile and 3 miles. Like that's the longest. 3 miles is like getting pretty out there, but I'm sure there's longer and shorter. The distance isn't so bad. It's more like just very up and down hills, like through
Oh wow.
things. Yeah, that type of a thing. So it's not so much about the distance as it is about like the terrain. It makes me laugh when I think about like people that hike. Like no shade, I think it's awesome, but like I feel like if I were to hike, I'd just be like, okay, so like where's the crag? Like where are we going? Like this is it. I went on a small hike.
Destination?
Yeah, I went on a small hike out there with a friend that was newer to climbing, and she's like, I would love to climb more, but I'm just like, I can't. And I was like, oh, it's fine. Like we'll go for a hike. And yeah, it was fun, but I was just like, oh, all right. That was
Yeah, do we
it.
just go to the bar now? Like, what do we do?
One thing I also wanted to ask is you have a dog. You have a dog named Noodles.
Yeah.
Does Noodles come climbing with you or running with you at all?
So I have a place where I take her off leash and we'll run on a trail, and she's a really good runner. She's off leash. She doesn't do well on leash running, or maybe I'm not as good as like traversing when she just gets like distracted, but she is a pretty good runner. She can run for about 2 miles. I'll take her to the gym. She's getting more and more used to being kind of a crag dog here at the gym. So I have no doubt if she can navigate the gym in this kind of environment, that being an outdoor crag dog, she'd have no problem. But yeah, everybody loves Noodles. I mean, she's absolutely adorable. She grew up kind of inside of a clinic, in a PT clinic, in a really busy PT clinic, kind of a treatment dog. She would just go up onto the different plinths, kick it with patients as they were working through stuff. She's pretty great. She's a good therapy dog without the official title. Yeah, she's a therapy dog for sure.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I
Yeah.
tried taking my cat to the crag one time and it went fine. But not like, I don't know, I just feel like she just wanted to be inside more than she wanted to be outside. So I was like, we're gonna let you have this one. Yeah. I have met a lot of crag dogs, but I've met maybe 1 or 2 crag cats, and I think there might be a reason for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, are we doing this out of selfish reasons? Like, sometimes when I take Noodles out, I'm like, is it because I want Noodles out, or is it because Noodles would like to be out? And I think now it's to the point where she is enjoying being out more and more. She's getting more kind of used to it. But I definitely like have to force some naps. I'm like, okay, well, now it's nap time. Like, now you have to like nap, because dogs really like sleeping throughout the day, like quite a lot, And if you keep them awake for too long, it's like just like a child. Like, they'll kind of get crabby and cranky. I don't know how cats are. I've never owned a cat, but
yeah, cats, I don't really know how cats are, and I've had cats for 6 years. Alyssa and I took a small break here due to some technical issues, but she joined us back at her house to show us Noodles and share what she's excited for in her upcoming year of climbing.
Now you can kind of get to meet Noodles in person. Come here. Come here. It's a chicken. She's here. This is her. Yeah. For climbing, I would say excited to get into some like top roping and kind of like return the favor and kind of pay it forward and kind of pass the torch or pass the rope, if you will, and help other people get more familiar with like outdoor climbing and top roping in that way. And there's just so much to learn. And then resuming I was climbing weekly with my mentor. He kind of took a long trip for the summer to do some guiding. Now he's back. So resuming that. He's starting a program called Silver Cinders at the gym and getting, older climbers familiar with climbing. So Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Just becoming more involved in hosting workshops that are specific about finger injuries and about shoulder injuries. But yeah, I can't thank you enough for fielding all these really fun questions and also valuable questions for hopefully yourself, but also for the general climbing community as a whole. And producing all this, like taking the time to make all this happen, takes a lot of times, takes a lot of passion, and it definitely shows through. Like your passion shows through your work. As far as where people can find me, I have a website. It's aokpt.com. And then my Instagram is very similar. It's aok_pt. So I make a lot of videos just related to climbing, climbing rehab, climbing injury prevention, as well as like running rehab, running injury prevention. That's all on there. I take requests all the time. So if you have a specific thing and you want a video about it, send me a message. I'm happy to answer that. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. You can search AOK Physical Therapy, and I'll be on those mediums as well.
For anyone that wants to work with Alyssa, I will make sure to leave all of her information for her business in the description. Thank you so much to Alyssa for being on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that you as a listener enjoyed it as well. Before I go, I do just want to point out that if you are listening to this before September 26th, 2023, you can get yourself a limited edition Court Climbs hat to celebrate 3 years of me having the channel. So if you are interested in getting yourself a hat, check out the link in the description. Thank you everyone for listening, and as always, stay hyped.